Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Mhm.
Today we're going to be diving into a topic that's been making waves in the gaming world lately.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and that is the future of video game pricing. We've got a really interesting source to dig into.
Okay.
Um, it's a YouTube video from the channel Altiori called People Can't Afford Video Games Anymore.
Oh, wow.
Um, and it's pretty intense. It definitely grabs your attention
Yeah.
right from the start with that title.
Yeah.
So we'll see if their concerns hold water. And we'll explore what the future of gaming might look like.
Yeah, I think the video makes some bold claims, and it uses some pretty strong language to get its point across. So
Right.
it will be interesting to unpack those and see if they actually stand up to scrutiny.
Right. So one of the big things that Altiori brings up is this idea that we're moving away from owning our games.
Okay.
Like we're paying for them.
Yeah.
But it's more like we're just renting them
Yeah.
because they're tied to these digital licenses.
Yeah, this shift from physical copies to digital licenses is definitely something that's changed the gaming landscape. I mean, with a physical copy, you have that tangible object that you own.
Right.
But with a digital license, you're essentially just granted permission to access that game on a specific platform. So it really raises questions about ownership and what happens if those licenses are revoked or if the servers are shut down.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like what happens if a company decides to pull the plug on a game's servers?
Yeah.
Do we just lose access to something that we paid for? Um, Altiori brought up the example of Demon's Souls. And when the servers for that game shut down, players who hadn't finished it lost the chance to get some of the achievements
Mhm.
and experience some of that content.
Right.
And that's going to be frustrating.
Absolutely. It highlights a real concern about the longevity of digital games. However, there are alternatives out there. Platforms like GOG offer DRM-free games. In those cases, you actually download the game files. And you own them outright, no servers, no licenses, just you and the game. So there are options out there that prioritize consumer ownership. And it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out as the digital marketplace continues to evolve.
So, okay, maybe digital ownership is kind of a gray area.
Mhm.
But then there's this other big issue that Altiori brings up, and that is the price of the games themselves.
Oh.
The rumor is that GTA 6 might launch at $100.
Oh, wow.
And Altiori's argument is that these AAA game companies are just getting too greedy.
Oh,
Their
yeah.
budgets are out of control,
Wow.
and they're mismanaging their resources.
I see. So they're using GTA 6 as an example to highlight this larger trend
Exactly.
of rising game prices.
Yeah.
And they're attributing that to corporate greed and mismanagement.
Yeah, and they point to the development costs of games like Minecraft and Star Citizen to illustrate this point.
Okay, so how did those games fit into their argument?
Well, Minecraft was made
Yeah.
for a relatively tiny budget, and it
Mhm.
became this global phenomenon.
Right.
Star Citizen, on the other hand, has already cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, and it's not even finished yet.
Wow. Yeah. That's a pretty stark contrast in terms of development costs.
It does make you wonder, right? Are these massive budgets really necessary? To create a great game, Altiori argues that indie games
Mm.
are proof that you don't need millions of dollars to make something incredible.
Okay.
I'm listening. Look at games like Among Us, Undertale, and Stardew Valley. They were all made with tiny budgets, and they've all become huge successes.
That's true. Those indie games were incredibly successful, and I think they really demonstrate that. Innovation and strong gameplay can resonate with players, even without those blockbuster budgets. However, it's also important to consider that development costs have been rising across the industry. Things like inflation, larger development teams, the increasing complexity of game technology, all of these things contribute to higher budgets. It's not always about mismanagement or greed.
That's a good point. It's like comparing apples and oranges in some ways, right?
Yeah.
A massive open-world game with cutting-edge graphics. It's going to cost a lot more to make than a charming pixel art indie game.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with a lot of different factors at play, but I think it's important to acknowledge both sides of the argument.
So where do we go from here? If AAA games are getting more expensive and there are concerns about digital ownership, does that mean the future of gaming belongs to indie developers?
That's a question that Altiori explores, and it's one that has a lot of people talking. They also bring up another fascinating and slightly scary possibility:
Okay.
the rise of AI in game development.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. We're talking robots making video games.
Well, not quite robots, but the idea is that AI could potentially take over some of the tasks involved in game development, which raises all sorts of questions about the future of jobs in the industry and whether or not AI can truly replicate the creativity and the artistry of human game designers.
Whoa, okay, so we've got digital ownership worries, AAA games potentially getting too expensive, indie games rising in popularity, and AI lurking in the background, maybe about to shake things up even more.
It's a lot to consider, and Altiori doesn't shy away from any of it. Their video really throws down the gauntlet, especially when it comes to what gamers can do. To push back against some of these trends,
Okay.
they actually suggest something pretty radical.
I'm on the edge of my seat. What do they suggest?
They call it a gamer strike.
A strike, like refusing to buy games. Now, that's a bold strategy. Would it actually work?
That's a great question, and one we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore the potential impact of a gamer strike and look at some other ways players might be able to make their voices heard in this evolving gaming landscape.
All right, so before we went on that little thought journey about indie games and AI, we were talking about Altiori's idea of a gamer strike, essentially. Gamers would collectively refuse to buy games, to protest things like rising prices and these questionable digital ownership practices.
Right.
It sounds pretty...
It's definitely a provocative idea, and Altieri makes a strong case. For gamers leveraging their collective buying power, they actually compare it to worker strikes, where employees refuse to work until their demands are met, for better wages,
Or,
better working conditions in this case. Gamers would be hitting game companies where it hurts their profits by withholding their purchases.
but the gaming community is huge and diverse.
That's true.
Could we really get enough people on board to make a real difference? I mean, getting gamers to agree on anything can be like a challenge in itself.
You're not wrong about that. However, we have seen gamers come together before to advocate for change, whether it's pushing for better representation in games or speaking out against controversial microtransactions.
Right.
So it's not entirely unprecedented. A successful gamer strike, I think,
Yeah.
would require a very clear message, widespread participation, and a willingness to really stand united.
So let's play devil's advocate for a minute.
Sure.
What are some of the potential downsides of a gamer strike? I mean, it sounds like it could really shake things up.
Yeah.
But are there any unintended consequences
Yeah.
that we should consider?
That's a really important question. One potential downside, I think, is the impact on the livelihoods of developers. If a strike significantly impacted a company's sales, it could lead to layoffs or even studio closures, which would ultimately hurt the very people who create the games that we love. So it's a very delicate balancing act, and I think it's really important to weigh those potential benefits against the potential harm.
That's a really good point. It makes you think of all of the people who work behind the scenes to bring these games to life. The programmers, the artists, the writers, the musicians. A strike could have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry.
Precisely. And another potential challenge is the difficulty of maintaining momentum over time.
Right.
Gamer attention spans can be notoriously fickle.
Right.
And what starts as a passionate movement could fizzle out if people lose interest, or the message gets diluted.
So a gamer strike might not be like the silver bullet solution.
Yeah.
But surely there are other ways for gamers to make their voices heard, right?
Absolutely.
What are some alternative strategies?
Well, reviews, for example, are incredibly powerful. A well-written review that highlights concerns about pricing or other issues can really influence potential buyers and put pressure on developers.
Okay.
And then don't underestimate the impact of social media. A viral tweet, a trending hashtag, or a well-crafted video can quickly bring attention to an issue and spark a wider conversation.
You're right. Social media has become a major force in shaping public opinion. And it's definitely a tool that gamers can use to make their voices heard.
And then there's the power of supporting indie developers. If you're concerned about rising prices and the practices of these big AAA companies, voting with your wallet by purchasing games from smaller studios who prioritize affordability and innovative gameplay really sends a strong message.
It's like putting your money where your mouth is.
Exactly, supporting the kind of games that you want to see more of. And it's not just about individual choices, it's about collective action. When enough people make those choices, it can create a real shift in the market.
Now, all this brings us back to Altiori's boiling frog analogy.
Right.
They argue that these changes in the industry are happening gradually, almost imperceptibly, like slowly raising the temperature of the water until the frog doesn't realize it's being boiled alive.
It's a pretty stark analogy, but it highlights a real concern. Are we as gamers becoming complacent about rising prices, microtransactions, the erosion of ownership rights? Are we slowly accepting a future where we have less control over the games we play and how we experience them.
Those are some heavy questions. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people just want to play games and have fun without getting bogged down in all of this like industry stuff.
I understand that. But the reality is, these changes are happening, and they are having a real impact on the games we play and how we access them. And I think being aware of those changes and having these thoughtful discussions about them is important, even if it's just with our friends or with our online communities.
So it's not necessarily about taking to the streets with picket signs
Mm-hmm.
and chanting slogans.
Yes.
It's about being informed,
Mm.
making conscious choices,
Mm.
and speaking up when something doesn't sit right.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have a voice.
Yeah.
And that our collective actions can shape the future of gaming.
All right, so we've talked about the pros and cons
Yeah.
of a gamer strike. We've explored some alternative strategies for making our voices heard,
Mhm.
and we've considered the importance of being aware of this boiling frog phenomenon. But what does all of this really mean for the average gamer?
That's the question that we'll try to answer. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the potential long-term consequences of these trends and leave you with some thought-provoking questions to consider as you navigate this ever-evolving gaming landscape.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the future of video game pricing. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
It really has.
We've explored some heavy stuff, like digital ownership, rising costs, and even the possibility of AI game developers. And of course, we can't forget Altiori's call for a gamer strike.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to process. And I imagine some of you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Right.
But remember, at the end of the day, games are about having fun.
Exactly. We're not trying to suck the joy out of gaming. With all this talk about industry trends and potential problems, what we're trying to do is encourage a conversation, a more mindful approach
Yeah.
to how we engage with this amazing hobby.
I think that's a great way to put it, because the truth is, the choices we make as consumers really do have a real impact on the future of gaming. If we're not happy with rising prices or the way digital ownership is being handled, we don't have to just sit back and accept it.
Right.
We have options.
So let's bring it all home. What does this mean for you, the person listening to this deep dive?
Well, I think first and foremost, it means being informed, understanding the changes that are happening in the industry, the potential benefits and drawbacks, and the role that you play as a consumer.
And then it's about deciding what you're comfortable with. Are you okay with paying $70 or even $100 for a new AAA game?
Are you comfortable with the idea of digital licenses instead of owning those physical copies?
Do you feel like microtransactions have gone too far? Are you excited about the potential of indie games and AI in game development? Or are you concerned about their potential impact?
Those are all really important questions you need to ask yourself. And there's no right or wrong answer. Every gamer's going to have a different perspective.
Right.
And once you've kind of formed your own opinions, don't be afraid to share them. Talk to your friends, engage in online discussions, write reviews, let developers know what you think. Your voice matters.
And remember, you can vote with your wallet. Support developers whose values align with your own. If you're not happy with the direction of AAA games, explore the world of indie games, or consider DRM-free platforms that prioritize consumer ownership.
The future of gaming isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the collective choices of millions of gamers all around the world.
So the next time you're thinking about buying a new game, take a moment to consider the bigger picture. Think about the kind of gaming experience you want to support, the message you want to send to the industry, and the future that you want to help create.
Gaming is a powerful form of entertainment. It's a source of creativity and connection, and a constantly evolving art form. Let's work together to make sure that it remains accessible, enjoyable, and sustainable for everyone.
That wraps up our deep dive into the future of video game pricing. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit empowering. Thanks for joining us, and keep on gaming.